Marcus Webb wiped the grease from his hands as he hauled the last bag of scrap metal toward the disposal chute. The lower decks of Station Jericho never slept, but at this hour, even the usual hum of activity had died down to an occasional clang of pipes and the distant whir of life support systems. He was exhausted. 14 hours of patching together ancient freighter engines had left his back aching and his eyes burning. He tossed the bag into the chute and turned to head back when he heard it. A soft scratching sound, then a pitiful whimper that made him freeze. Marcus had lived on stations his whole life. He knew the sounds of rats, malfunctioning machinery, and even the occasional drunk spacer. This was different. He followed the noise around the corner to where the garbage containers sat in shadow. Two small shapes huddled against the far wall, barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. At first, Marcus thought they were some kind of exotic pet someone had abandoned. Then one of them lifted its head, and his breath caught in his throat. Dragons. Actual dragons. But these were nothing like the proud, massive creatures he had seen in news broadcasts. These two were tiny, no bigger than house cats, with scales that should have gleamed like precious gems but instead looked dull and lifeless. Their wings were torn, hanging at odd angles. Ribs showed through their sides. One had a nasty gash along its neck. They stared at him with large, intelligent eyes that held far too much understanding for simple animals. Marcus could see fear there but also desperate hope. The smaller of the two tried to spread its wings in what should have been a threatening display, but the creature was so weak it simply collapsed back against its companion. Marcus knew dragons were dangerous. Everyone knew that. The Dragon Empire controlled dozens of star systems and their warriors were legendary. But these two were children. Starving children who would die if someone did not help them. He looked around quickly. The corridor was empty. Station security would probably confiscate them, maybe even kill them. Dragons had been refugees on the station before, and the reception had not been friendly. There was some kind of war happening in the Dragon Empire. Nobody wanted to get involved. Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. He pulled off his work jacket and moved slowly toward the two hatchlings. They pressed against each other, trembling. He spoke softly, the way his grandfather had taught him to approach frightened animals. It did not matter that these were intelligent beings. Fear was fear. One of them, the slightly larger one with copper-colored scales, chirped something in a language Marcus did not understand. But the meaning was clear enough. They were terrified but too weak to run. Marcus wrapped them both carefully in his jacket. They were so light, barely any weight at all. He could feel their tiny hearts racing against his chest as he tucked them inside his shirt and headed back to his quarters. Every step felt like walking through a minefield. If anyone saw him, if anyone reported him, he would be arrested for harboring illegal aliens at best. His quarters were small and cramped, but they were private. He laid the two dragons on his bunk and looked at them properly under the lights. They were in terrible shape. He had no idea what dragons ate, but food was food when you were starving. Marcus opened his tiny refrigerator and pulled out the protein rations he had been saving for the week. He offered a piece to the copper-scaled one. The dragon sniffed it cautiously, then devoured it with shocking speed. Its companion, smaller with silver-blue scales, followed immediately. As Marcus watched them eat, he wondered what he had just gotten himself into. He was just a mechanic. He fixed ships and minded his own business. But looking at these two small, desperate creatures, he knew he could not have walked away. 5 years passed like water through Marcus's fingers. The two small dragons had stayed with him for exactly 3 months. During that time, they had transformed from skeletal, terrified hatchlings into healthy, curious young dragons. Ember, as Marcus had named the copper-scaled one, had been bold and playful. Ash, the silver-blue one, had been quieter but wickedly intelligent. They had learned to understand human speech with shocking speed. Ember could even speak a few broken words by the end. They had helped Marcus in his workshop, their small claws perfect for reaching into tight spaces and engine cores. More than once, their assistance had saved him hours of work. Then one morning, Marcus had woken to find them gone. No struggle, no forced entry. They had simply left. On his workbench sat 2 golden scales, each the size of his thumbnail, gleaming with an inner light that never faded. Marcus had stared at them for a long time, feeling an unexpected ache in his chest. He had known they would leave eventually. Dragons belonged in the stars, not in a mechanic's cramped quarters. Life went on. Marcus expanded his workshop with the money he had saved. He hired an assistant, a young woman named Rita who had a gift for electrical systems. His reputation grew. People came from 3 stations over for his honest work and fair prices. He no longer struggled to pay for food. He could even afford real coffee now and then. The galaxy changed around him. News feeds constantly buzzed with updates about the Dragon Empire. The civil war that had created so many refugees finally ended after 4 brutal years. A new empress had united the warring clans through a combination of military genius and political cunning. The reports said she was young but ruthless when necessary, merciful when possible. Marcus watched these reports with interest he could not quite explain. Sometimes he wondered if Ember and Ash were somewhere out there, among the millions of dragons rebuilding their civilization. He never told anyone about them. Dragon affairs were complicated and dangerous. He was just a human mechanic who had shown basic kindness to 2 starving children. The golden scales stayed in a small metal box in his quarters. He took them out sometimes late at night when he could not sleep. They still gleamed as brightly as the day the dragons had left them. He had researched their meaning once. Life debt tokens, the database had said. A sacred promise among dragons that a debt would be repaid. Marcus had laughed at that. What debt? He had shared his food with hungry kids. That was just being decent. You did not keep balance sheets on kindness. Station Jericho grew busier as the Dragon Empire stabilized. Trade routes reopened. Refugees who had fled the war began returning home. Marcus saw a few dragons pass through, usually merchants or diplomats. They were magnificent in their true forms, towering and powerful. He never approached them, never mentioned what he had done. It felt private somehow. A small secret that belonged only to him. Rita asked him once why he sometimes stared at the news feeds when Dragon Stories played. Marcus had shrugged and said he found their culture interesting. It was not quite a lie. He did find it interesting. He just had personal reasons that he kept to himself. As year 5 approached, Marcus had almost convinced himself that Ember and Ash had forgotten him. They had been so young. Perhaps they did not even remember the human mechanic who had wrapped them in his jacket and fed them protein rations. Perhaps the scales had been a formality, nothing more. He was fine with that. He had not helped them for a reward. He had helped them because it was the right thing to do. The memory of 2 small dragons eating ravenously on his bunk, their eyes bright with relief and trust, was reward enough. Marcus Webb went to bed on the night before everything changed, completely unaware that his quiet life was about to end forever. The alarm started at dawn. Marcus jolted awake as red emergency lights flooded his quarters and the station-wide announcement system crackled to life. A panicked voice echoed through every corridor. All personnel, this is Station Command. A Dragon Empire warship has entered our space. Repeat, Dragon Empire military vessel approaching. This is not a drill. Remain calm and await further instructions. Marcus stumbled to his small window and felt his blood turn cold. The warship was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the station itself. Its dark hull gleamed with decorative gold that marked it as something important. Something Imperial. Smaller ships detached from it like insects, heading straight for the docking ports. His communicator buzzed frantically. Rita's voice came through high with fear. Marcus, are you seeing this? What do they want? Nobody's done anything to provoke them, have we? I don't know, Marcus said, though his eyes drifted to the small metal box on his shelf. The box with 2 golden scales. His mouth went dry. Within an hour, the station was in chaos. Dragon shuttles had docked at 3 different ports. Station security stood helplessly aside as 4 massive dragons in ceremonial armor swept through the corridors. People pressed themselves against walls, some crying, others frozen in terror. Dragons did not visit human stations with Imperial guards unless something was very, very wrong. Marcus was in his workshop, trying desperately to focus on a fuel injector repair, when his door slid open. He did not need to turn around. He could feel the heat radiating from the beings behind him, could hear the scrape of claws on metal flooring. Marcus Webb. The voice was deep and resonant, speaking perfect human standard language. Step away from your work. Marcus set down his tools with shaking hands and turned slowly. 4 dragons filled his workshop, their heads nearly touching the ceiling even though they had assumed their smaller bipedal forms. They wore black armor etched with gold, and their eyes held the cold assessment of professional warriors. The leader, a massive dragon with scarred crimson scales, stepped forward. I am Catharax, captain of the Empress's personal guard. You will come with us. Marcus's throat closed. What did I do? I haven't broken any laws. I'm just a mechanic. You are summoned to the Imperial throne world, Catharax said, his tone allowing no argument. The Empress requires your presence. Refusal is not an option. The Empress. Marcus felt dizzy. There must be a mistake. I don't know any. There is no mistake, human. Another guard, this one with emerald scales, spoke sharply. You have 1 hour to gather essential belongings. We depart immediately. Outside, Marcus could hear Rita arguing with someone, her voice getting louder. You can't just take him. This is a human station. We have rights. Marcus hasn't done anything wrong. Catharax's expression did not change. Your assistant is loyal. Admirable. But this matter is beyond station jurisdiction. Marcus Webb, you are not under arrest. You are being escorted as a summoned guest of the Dragon Empire. However, you will come with us. The alternative would be unfortunate. The threat was clear even though the words were polite. Marcus thought about running, but where would he go? These were the Empress's personal guards. They could level the entire station if they wanted to. Can I at least tell my assistant I'm leaving? She needs to know what to do with the workshop. Catharax considered this, then nodded once. 5 minutes. We will accompany you. Marcus stepped outside where Rita stood with station security, her face pale. When she saw him flanked by the 4 armored dragons, tears spilled down her cheeks. Marcus, what's happening? I don't know, he said honestly. But the workshop is yours now. All of it. Keep it running. I'll come back if I can. He did not believe those last words even as he said them. The journey to the Dragon Throne world took 3 days. Marcus spent most of it in a luxurious cabin that felt more like a prison cell despite its comfort. The guards brought him food, excellent food that he could barely taste through his fear. They answered none of his questions. They simply watched him with those unreadable reptilian eyes. On the second day, Marcus noticed something strange. When a guard delivered his meal, the dragon bowed slightly before leaving. Just a small dip of the head, but unmistakable. Marcus stared at the closed door, confused. Why would an elite Imperial warrior bow to a human mechanic? When they finally arrived, Marcus pressed his face to the viewport and forgot to breathe. The throne world was beyond anything he had imagined. Mountains pierced the clouds, their peaks carved into spiraling cities that glittered like jewels. Dragons filled the sky, thousands of them, soaring between crystal spires. Waterfalls tumbled from impossible heights, and forests of silver trees covered the valleys below. The ship landed at a massive palace complex that seemed to grow directly from the mountain itself. Marcus was escorted through corridors so grand he felt like an insect. Murals covered every wall, depicting dragon history in stunning detail. Servants in fine robes stopped and stared as he passed. Word spread quickly. A human was being brought before the Empress. They entered a throne room that could have held Marcus's entire station. Hundreds of dragons in ceremonial dress lined the walls, their scales ranging from pure white to deepest black. At the far end, elevated on a platform of polished obsidian, sat a throne carved from a single massive ruby. And on that throne sat the Empress. She was smaller than Marcus had expected but radiated such power that he felt his knees weaken. Her scales were burnished gold, and her eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much death. A crown of interwoven platinum and diamond rested on her head. She studied Marcus in complete silence as Catharax led him forward. Kneel, Catharax whispered. Marcus dropped to his knees on the cold stone floor. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then the Empress spoke, her voice clear and carrying across the vast chamber. Marcus Webb, do you know why you are here? No, Your Majesty, Marcus managed. I don't understand any of this. The Empress stood, and the assembled dragons immediately bowed. She walked down from her throne with fluid grace, her claws clicking softly on the stone. As she approached, something impossible happened. Her form shimmered and shrank, taking on a smaller, more human-sized shape. She removed her crown and held it loosely in one hand. Look at me, she commanded softly. Marcus raised his head. The Empress's eyes were golden, flecked with copper. Familiar eyes. His breath caught. 5 years ago, the Empress said, a human mechanic found 2 starving dragon hatchlings in an alley. He could have ignored them. He could have turned them over to authorities. Instead, he took them to his home. He fed them his own food. He nursed them back to health, expecting nothing in return. Marcus's vision blurred. Ember? Ash. Movement from behind the throne. 2 dragons stepped forward and Marcus's heart stopped. They were adults now, magnificent and powerful, wearing the armor of Imperial advisors. But he recognized them instantly. The copper scales. The silver blue. The way they moved. Ember made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Hello, Marcus. We told you we would never forget. Ash's voice was quieter but heavy with emotion. You saved the Empress's siblings. You saved us. The throne room erupted in whispers. Marcus stared at them, then at the Empress, unable to process what he was hearing. The Empress knelt before him, ignoring the gasps from the assembled court. "You are owed a debt that can never be repaid, Marcus Webb. But I will try." Marcus could not speak. His mind refused to accept what was happening. The Empress of the entire Dragon Empire was kneeling before him. Ember and Ash, the two tiny hatchlings he had wrapped in his work jacket, now stood as her personal guards and advisors. The entire throne room watched in absolute silence. The Empress rose gracefully and gestured for Marcus to stand. "Let me tell you a story, Marcus Webb. 5 years ago my empire tore itself apart. My father, the Emperor, was murdered by his own council. They wanted power. They wanted war. I survived only because I was young and they underestimated me." She walked slowly back toward her throne, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "I sent my youngest siblings away with trusted guards, hoping they would survive even if I did not. The guards were killed during an ambush. Ember and Ash fled, alone and terrified, through refugee ships until they ended up on your station." Ember stepped forward, his copper scales gleaming. "We were dying, Marcus. We had not eaten in 6 days. We were too afraid to reveal ourselves because dragons were being hunted. Then you found us. You asked nothing," Ash added quietly. "You did not demand payment. You did not see political advantage. You saw 2 hungry children and you fed them. It was that simple for you." The Empress reached her throne but did not sit. "When my siblings finally found their way back to me, they were changed. They had seen something I had forgotten during the war. They had seen kindness from a stranger who expected nothing. They told me about the human mechanic who shared his food, who spoke gently, who never once treated them as tools or weapons." Marcus found his voice though it shook. "I just did what anyone would do." "No." The Empress's response was sharp. "Most would not. Most saw dragon refugees as problems. As political complications. You saw children. That difference matters." She turned to address the assembled court. "I rebuilt our empire on strength and unity. But I realized something was missing. We had isolated ourselves, believing we needed no one. That isolation nearly destroyed us. We need other voices, other perspectives, other ways of thinking." The Empress looked directly at Marcus. "I am forming a council of voices. Representatives from different species who will advise the throne. Not with politics or schemes but with honesty. With the kind of simple wisdom that sees 2 starving children and feeds them without calculating the cost." Marcus felt panic rise in his chest. "Your Majesty, I'm not qualified for that. I'm just a mechanic. I do not know anything about politics or diplomacy or running an empire." "Exactly," the Empress said, and for the first time she smiled. "I have 1,000 advisors who know politics. I need someone who knows what is right." Ember and Ash insisted that if humanity were to have a voice in my court, it should be yours. Not a diplomat who will tell me what I want to hear. A man who acts with integrity when no one is watching. Ember moved to stand beside Marcus. "You do not have to decide now. But please at least stay. Let us show you what your kindness created. The empire we are building is different because of what you taught us." Marcus looked at the 3 dragons who had somehow become the most important beings in his life. Ember, who had been so bold even when starving. Ash, who had been quiet but observant. And the Empress, who carried the weight of billions on her shoulders but still remembered to honor a debt. "I am not a hero," Marcus said quietly. "I just shared my food." "That is precisely why you are needed," the Empress replied. "Heroes seek glory. You sought nothing. That is the rarest wisdom of all." Marcus thought about his workshop, about Rita, about his small, comfortable life. Then he thought about 2 tiny dragons trembling in an alley, and the choice he had made without hesitation. "I will try," he said finally. "I cannot promise I will be any good at this, but I will try." The Empress nodded, satisfaction clear in her golden eyes. "That is all I ask."